Welcome to council meeting. It's great to see so many people here and engaged and becoming informed or well informed already. It's an important part of the process to have this level of community engagement in these important issues. So thanks for being here. Just before I call the meeting to order, there's a public question period. Are there any members of the public that have questions at this time? If you could just identify yourself for the record.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Jennifer Rowley, and I am a full-time resident here in Canmore. In January, Council decided, and Quantum Place was in agreement, that both the Smith Creek ASP and the Resort Centre Amendment should be read together. Since they're closely tied to each other, reading them together would give us the best overview of the proposed development of the lands. Is there a reason that this logic has changed so that the Resort Centre is being given first reading while Smith Creek is off the table? And is there still a possibility that Council could postpone the first reading of the Resort Centre Amendment until that decision has been made?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your questions. Did you want to stay and hear the answer?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. You asked a few questions there, but yes, I'm also disappointed that it's come to this. My preference was to have both ASPs, the amendment and the Smith Creek, considered at the same time. Regardless, given the lengthy delay that has been encountered on the Smith Creek application, my preference is to give the Resort Centre first reading now, for reasons that I'll speak to during the debate. But it is something that had to give a lot of thought to. You asked other questions if first reading could be postponed, and the answer is yes. If there's a postponing motion from a member of council, then that can occur. And there was a third question. Nope. Yeah, this isn't how I would prefer to see things playing out. But we'll muddle on through here tonight and see where it leaves us. Mr. Stevenson, you have a question.
My name is Jerry Stevenson, a mining engineer, resident of Canmore for 48 years. Mayor Borman, council members, ladies and gentlemen, before I go ahead with my question, I would like to make a very brief comment as background to the question. In 1997, the Conservative provincial government passed into law a regulation under the Municipal Government Act. The regulation said that developers who develop on Canmore land affected by undermining must obtain insurance coverage of a type and for a time and a period of time satisfactory to the minister to insure against claims for damages arising from undermining. So we all thought Canmore was protected. We thought so, but it wasn't so. The same government ministers who had brought in that regulation then ignored it for the next 18 years. The result, $550 million worth of development on this property now, much of it on undermined land, and no insurance. The result is that any damages that occur on that land have to be paid for by Canmore taxpayers. The collapsed shaft at Durgas Gate is a prime example of taxpayers' money paying the cost of repair without as yet a long-term solution. And as you know, members of council, I have been helping the engineering department with trying to find a solution to that. After 62 years in mining, 30 years experience of mitigation, I know that it's impossible with the best engineering practice to guarantee a 100% safe situation. Events such as Durgas Gate will continue to happen, not necessarily annually, but they will continue. So what is the lesson of all this? The taxpayer must not be left to pay such cost. But insurance is not the answer. When bankruptcy or sale of a property occurs, insurance ends. I believe the answer is a trust fund, which would be simple and effective. I'm coming to my question.
Good. A question would be good.
Sorry?
A question would be good.
Yeah, I hope it will. I've worked on this for 2 years and suggested to provincial ministers, our new NDP government and our MLA, a trust fund should be administered by the provincial government, payments being made by the developer into the fund based on the development value on undermined land. The fund would then be used to pay for events such as Durgas Gate. This would be a very easy solution. The silence from our ministers has been deafening. So my question, the majority of the people here tonight, including members of council and administration, are taxpayers who, unless the Alberta provincial ministers implement the regulation, which is on the books, we will continue to pay for events which occur on construction on mined land affected by undermining. Mayor Borman, would you be good enough to describe the status of your negotiations, the negotiations with the province on this important issue? In doing so, would you mind addressing not just the problem of infrastructure on municipal land, but also the problem of housing on land owned by householders? How, in other words, will you remove this burden from taxpayers? As you and Council are already well aware, this is particularly important given that later tonight, Council will be considering giving first reading to a bylaw which will vastly increase the area of land which is severely affected by undermining by adding the unfinished golf course to the existing resort centre lands. This land is literally a minefield. Over 75% of it is undermined in 1, 2, or even 3 seams, with shallow workings, steep workings coming to the surface, and so on. There are many potential Durgas gates on this land. Is it, in fact, wise to even go ahead with the first reading of such a risky amendment? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson, and that was a long and detailed question, and I appreciate that you've been so involved in these issues, and I believe that your background and perspective is valued by everybody involved in these issues. At this time, many of your questions are not answered, but I can assure you that we have been working with the province or advocating to the province for some time at both the deputy minister level and the ministerial level, and we're trying to reach clarity on these issues as well because they are important. Recently, the CAO and the General Manager of Infrastructure were in Edmonton meeting with Deputy Minister, and from that conversation, they've written the province and asked for certainties on what they understood from that meeting. So the town is trying to get clarity on those answers in writing from the province. We expect that response from the province fairly soon, and we will be sharing it publicly as soon as we get it. That's about all I can say.
Okay, just one further comment. I have offered my services free of charge to the town and to the ministers in giving any help I can to try and solve this issue. I think it's something we all want to see shared and solved before we go too much further. Thank you.
Thank you. Unless there's further questions from the public.
Hi, my name's Lauren Kepkevich, and I'm a full-time resident here in Canmore. Thanks for taking my question. So from my understanding, the reason that the third-party review for Resort Centre was only released recently is because the review was an iterative process between Fiera and Golder. with Golder given the opportunity to address Fiera's concerns within that process. And so based on that understanding, I'm wondering, why did administration include Golder's rebuttal to the town's third-party review as part of the package for first reading without any response from Fiera, the town's consultant? And also, given that the Fiera reports finds Golder's EIS is potentially insufficient for making a decision in favor of the resort center proposal, what kind of weight does council plan to give to Fiera's evaluation, which the town contracted?
Sure. On the last question, I can tell you that myself, and I'm certain all of council, give a lot of weight to the third-party review. We were insistent that there be an independent, fully independent review of the EIS, and that's what's happening. I don't know if Fiera has asked for the opportunity to respond to the Golder rebuttal, but certainly I would encourage Fiera to do so if they have an interest. I don't know if admin has anything to add to that.
So I can speak to that, Mayor Borman, at the start of the presentation for first reading, if you like.
Thank you, because I'm curious as well. Are there other questions in from the public?
Good afternoon, Mayor Borrowman and councillors. My name is Gay Harden, and I'm a full-time resident of Canmore. Since the Golder EIS suggests that fencing is essential for their EIS predictions to hold, is council aware that should you choose to vote in favor of the ASP, that you are voting for a fence?
That's currently part of the ASP.
Mm-hmm.
It would carry that understanding.
Okay, it just
I mean,
seems that,
the ASP could be amended arguably, and during the discussions, direction given that some other mitigation would be required.
mm-hmm.
But that's certainly a part of the ASP application, that would be the mitigation proposed.
It just seems that that's one of the issues that's being strongly looked at.
Mhm.
I noticed in the EIS, it also says that the design of the fence will be decided after ASP approval. And that struck me as a little bit odd, in that I thought the fencing might, because it's such a large issue, that its design maybe should be considered before the ASP.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Are there other questions? Yes, ma'am? Oh, Mr. Pissat, you're too slow. No, there's somebody else.
Hello. Your Worship and members of Council, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. My name is Jennifer Stelfox. I'm a full-time resident in Canmore. And just before I ask my question, I'd like to take the opportunity to just thank you very much for all the time and effort that you've been putting in on this. I've been meaning to write you and tell you that. Haven't gotten around to it. So since you're all here, thank you. I just recognize that it's a very large burden.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And sort of in pertaining to recognizing how much load you've had on you, I just was curious if you feel that you've had adequate time to read and digest Fiera's report.
A fair question. I would say that I have, and I assume the rest of the council has, and understand, of course, that should the application be given or approved at first reading, there'll be some time yet, including the public hearing that would occur for further clarification on questions around the report. At the public hearing, should that occur, the applicant has an opportunity to present and answer questions specific to things like their consultants' reports. Does that answer your question adequately?
Yeah, I think so. Mostly I just was wondering whether the council felt they had, because it only came out just late last week, and just was wondering if you felt like you'd had adequate time to review it.
Yeah, and I reiterate, there'll be some time before third reading would be asked for,
Okay.
but there will be a lot of, generally speaking, in the process, there'll be a lot of back and forthing and questions and answers yet.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Pissot?
Your Worship, members of council, my name is Jim Pissot, and I want to thank you for this opportunity to address council in the question period. I have a brief question regarding the relationship between the administration analysis of the area structure plan, or lack of it, and Quantum Place's
I'm
application.
going to ask you not to be disrespectful to anybody in the room. Thank you.
I just noted, as it says in the material presented to you, that there is no administration analysis, and it will be forthcoming at second reading. That's correct?
Fair enough.
This is somewhat unusual in my experience. Usually the administration analysis accompanies first reading. I'm aware of the collaboration that's been encouraged by council between administration and Quantum Place, resulting in, among other things, the community advisory group and the terms of reference that directed this area structure plan. And I'm also aware in the administration's briefing of a discussion of a lot of feedback back and forth between administration and Quantum Place in the development of the area structure plan. So my question is this: what role, if any, has administration played in the development and submission of the application rationale which was put forward by Quantum Place? Were there specifically any ideas submitted by administration in terms of content or tone? Was there any drafting assistance provided by administration, any editing, or was there any kind of approval of the language of the application rationale before it was submitted to council?
So I'll start off, but I'll ask the general manager to also answer. But the collaborative approach that we engaged in, administration was responding to council direction in the sense of collaborating with the landowner. It was something that the town hasn't tried in the past, and we've tried it on this area structure plan, and it hasn't, admittedly, it hasn't gone quite as well as I'd hoped a couple of years ago. But I still think that working in that manner is... Sorry, Smith Creek, right. Yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay. So we're on Resort Center right now. Okay, Mr. Fart, to that question.
So in regards to the area structure plan amendment, through the iterative process, administration raised suggestions and areas, for example, where policy could be or should be updated. Given that the previous ASP was approved in 2004, we have since introduced policy around steep creeks, a number of other policy areas that the updated ASP would benefit from recent wording and recent language to reflect current policy. We also recently updated the MDP. So there were suggestions and discussions back and forth. The application, including the rationale provided, was that of the applicant. Administration did not provide content for that, and editorial control and content remained that of the applicant. So they, in discussion with us, they heard suggestions around areas to be updated, and they responded to those suggestions in what they felt was the appropriate manner.
Thank you, Mr. Fart.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. You're not a member of the public.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to add clarity to Mr. Pissot's questions about the drafting of the rationale. There was no administrative participation or editorial review in the rationale. So while we were working on the policy documents, the rationale was a submission of the applicant.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions then at this time, I'll call the meeting to order. And look to the agenda. Are there additions, changes to the agenda? Seeing none, I'll move the agenda be approved as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. We have no delegations this evening. Looking in the minutes of the April 18th meeting, are there any errors or omissions in those minutes? Seeing none, I'll move the minutes be adopted as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Turning then to item D1, under business arising from the minutes, the Rocky Mountain Cycling Club event appeal.
You didn't change your agenda like I asked you, did you?
Pardon me?
There's an error in the agenda. It's not Rocky Mountain Cycling
Sorry.
Club, it's I know, that's all right. I had to try. It's the Rundle Mountain Cycling Club we're here to talk about. And the motion I'm here to ask council to approve is that you uphold administration's decision to hold the Rundle Mountain Cycling Club Criterion Bike Race on June 24th in a location outside of the downtown core. And I want to begin by thanking and acknowledging the Rundle Mountain Cycling Club, and in particular Shane Monroe, who wore his RMCC jersey for the event tonight, and here in the third row. This has been a very frustrating situation and circumstance for them. They are a valued partner and event producer in the town of Canmore. We have incredibly positive feedback from all staff in arts and events, in event permitting, and streets and roads who have regularly worked with them. And Mr. Monroe in particular has been very gracious in a very frustrating circumstance. So huge kudos to RMCC and thank you for their integrity. I do also want to start by just addressing a couple of myths that I've heard in the last couple days. One is that the administration is suggesting that Criterion cannot be held downtown due to the Plaid Goat Bike Festival being held downtown. This is not true. Plaid Goat has also been gracious and is very willing to work with RMCC should council choose to approve this event in the downtown core. So there's no link between administration's suggestion or decision that the event can't be held downtown and the Plaid Goat. These two events are not in competition. The other is around an anti-cycle sentiment, which is of course also not true. The town is doing a lot to promote cycling in various forms in the community. The issue for administration is purely around a road closure. That is all. So the fundamental issue from administration's perspective is that in the 2016 to 2018 strategic plan, one of council's priorities is to address traffic congestion and parking in the downtown core. And after the 2016 RMCC crit, we did receive complaints from the community about traffic impacts. So administration believes that given other events that are happening in the community, and in particular this year, the construction on Main Street, which is not slated to be done by this weekend, that this event in the downtown location will adversely impact one of council's priorities, that of traffic congestion in the downtown core. So the fundamental question before you really is if that council feels that the value of this event outweighs the impact or the potential impact on congestion and complaints from businesses in the community, that you could support one of the alternate motions from the staff report. Administration could not, in good conscience, approve this in the downtown location because of those issues and felt that it was something that council needed to approve, which is why we're here tonight. I do also want to clarify that administration is very supportive of this event, and we would like to see it happen in the community, just in a different location. One of the most unfortunate circumstances why we're here tonight, has led to administration giving RMCC feedback from last year later than we should have. And that really was my responsibility, and it did not happen. And I apologize both to council and to RMCC for that. I'm not going to walk through all the circumstances for why that happened, except to say that they have largely been addressed and we're in a much better position now than we were this time last year, but that doesn't help with the situation that's before us. Significant work is being done by town staff on events and our process for event permits, for securing dates. We are seeing a significant increase in the requests for the number of events in town, and we're trying to put systems and processes in place to address that. That is going to take us some time, and again, it's not helpful to this particular event or this circumstance tonight. In terms of financial impacts, the event doesn't generate any revenue for the town. It does generate revenue for the Rundle Mountain Cycling Club. The cost for the town in the past to support the Criterion has been about $3,300, and that's largely in support from our Streets and Roads department. That doesn't include event permitting staff time to permit the event, but that's just the cost for Streets and Roads. It would likely be similar in 2017. And administration would say that based on our events policy, this is largely defined as a base level of support as the current events policy reads. We are in the process of updating that policy, but for the policy we currently have, which is from 2014, that is base support. So there are two alternate recommendations in the staff report. One is that the event go ahead in the downtown core but be held in the morning, and then comment on the future of the downtown location. And the second just removes the comment on the future of the downtown location. And both of those are, of course, available for council. No matter council's decision tonight, administration has and will continue to work with and support the Rundle Mountain Cycling Club. We want to ensure that they have a successful event. So I am asking council to uphold administration's decision to hold the Rundle Mountain Cycling Club crit bike race on the 24th in a location outside of the downtown core. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much. So the minor soccer event is scheduled on the
Sunday, the 25th.
And the crit event would be on,
I believe it's currently scheduled for the Saturday.
right.
Yeah, but the plaid goat is the Friday, Saturday,
Right.
Sunday.
So how would, do you know how the plaid goat and the RMCC would be able to coordinate and use the facility at the same time?
I don't know the shared logistics, but I did talk to the organizer of the plaid goat today and just confirmed with her. She is confident that they can do that. I believe I know RMCC and plaid goat have already been talking about how that they could work, and believe that there is a collaboration there that would not preclude the two from operating at the same time.
And in the past, the criterion is run sort of in the afternoon, hasn't it?
Correct. I believe from 1 to 6. So, and when Mr. Monroe was here in front of council earlier in April, he had one of his suggestions was that they could look at moving the event to the morning to try to minimize the impacts, believing that there's less traffic in town in the morning.
And there's other events that are associated to the RMCC weekend.
Yep, there's a hill climb in Silvertip, which is a closure of one lane of the road in Silvertip. And then the other one is on the road in between the Nordic Center and Three Sisters, which is not a town road, so we don't permit. But we have issued the permit or been able to issue the permit for the hill climb in Silvertip. It's just a one-lane closure, so there's less issue there. It doesn't affect the traffic in the downtown core.
Councillor Comfort.
Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Cowdell, Dr. Cowdell. Have you talked to Mr. Monroe about the complaints now that you've had, he's had a chance to hear them? Do you think that there's any chance by holding the race in the morning, some of those problems would be mitigated? I believe we heard from residents after the fact and a couple of businesses. So is there more that can be done that wasn't done last year that would help with this year?
It's really hard to say, in part because we don't know how many visitors will be in town on that weekend and the impact of the Main Street closure. So just anecdotally from all of our lived experience, it's probably true that there's less traffic around town at 8 in the morning than there is at 2 in the afternoon. When Mr. Monroe was here in April, he spoke to the fact that they held it in the afternoon because then racers would likely, and spectators would stay and have a meal or a drink after the race, right? So there's a different sort of trade-off here. It's really hard to say what do I think personally having it in the morning will have less traffic impact? I do. Do I still think the traffic impact might be significant? I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right there in the middle. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Councillor Stanford.
Thank you for your presentation. In your report, it also mentions that there's a race at the Nordic Center that weekend?
Correct.
Is it a bike race?
It's Rundle's Revenge.
Oh. Was that a bike race?
It might be a bike and running race. I'm not somebody who participates in that kind of thing. But the town of Canmore doesn't permit it at all, but there are a particular type of racer who are coming to town for that event.
But you're aware that there's another
Yes,
event?
we do coordinate events with the Nordic Center and communicate about who's hosting what at what time.
Right.
When initially this issue came up with the cycling club, we suggested that they maybe could hold the crit at the Nordic Center, and that is not possible because the Nordic Center is already hosting an event, and it may not even work for their needs, but
Right.
it was very quickly off the table.
And then we obviously have numerous weddings that day.
I don't know,
June is
Rebecca,
usually
do you
a
know
big-
if we have weddings
June
booked on that
weekends
wedding
are-
weekend? Here, come on up to the mic.
I do believe there are numerous weddings booked at the various sites that we have. So there's the Rundle View Parkette, and there's also the Quarry Lake Park.
Right.
But I wouldn't say that it's any more significant than a standard summer wedding weekend.
One of the things thank you, Rebecca. One of the things we did put in place in the last year was for weddings to begin to have alternate transportation plans. So before we issue the ability to use our spaces, you have to show how you're going to get people to and from the site without all of them coming in individual personal vehicles. So we are trying to mitigate some of the traffic from weddings in those ways.
And I
We
think-
don't actually police it, but
I think that
don't
was
tell
one of the
them.
concerns that was expressed in last year. It's not just the neighborhood, it's the backup across the Bow River Bridge that.
Yeah, the
for
complaints are
whatever
not
reason-
largely from the residents. It is the backup across the Bow River Bridge on 8th, and then last year it would be down Main Street. This year it will be on 10th.
Right. And you don't think that's something that can be mitigated with better flagging or something? I don't know. I mean, it's,
I think there'll be traffic backup. We could try something new with flagging, but I don't think it would be significant. Like, it will be a delay in traffic in town.
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor McCallum?
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for your presentation, Dr. Cottle. Could you remind me what is the timing that is being proposed for this race on the Saturday? You said in the morning. Is it like 8 to 10 or?
Sure. When Mr. Monroe was here, he talked to 8 to noon, 8 to 1 as what the time frame would be. You know, there's time required for setup and takedown and the event itself. So that was the time frame he gave when he presented to council in April.
Thank you. And so when Mr. Monroe spoke when he presented to council about how, and this is the general process when you're going to have a road closure, you go around to the surrounding homes and do we leave them a notice on their door, and then we also do advertising in the newspaper. How far does that expand?
So we do require an event producer to do advertising and to do notification, and Rundle Mountain Cycling Club, I will say, has a very good track record of working to do that. It is, though, just to impacted neighborhoods, so it doesn't go all the way back to Millennium and all the way to Spring Creek. Generally, our requirement is that it's for around where the closure is, but the advertisement in the paper shows the closure and alternative routes.
Okay, thank you. And actually rewind, in terms of weddings, do we know if the Union Hall is booked this year for a wedding or reception or anything?
We do not manage Union Hall bookings,
I know, I just
so
wasn't sure if, you said that you spoke with different organizations.
Yeah,
I wondered if
don't-
that fell off a plate.
there is a wedding.
Okay.
at the Union Hall.
Wedding or just a reception? You wouldn't know.
I believe it's a
Yeah.
reception booked for the Saturday evening.
Okay, all right. And so, based on all the activity that's happening downtown, would it be administration's intention that an alternative home would be found for this race permanently or just this year?
Well, that is certainly an alternative for council. One of the other things that Mr. Monroe talked about when he was presenting to council in April was looking at a different date. So I believe he explained that historically it was actually held in July, and then based on feedback because of busyness, it got moved into this weekend in June. What we're seeing now is creep into the shoulder season is very different from what it was 5 years ago. So there would be there is interest on administration's part to work with Mr. Monroe to try to find a different weekend. It's not entirely his or our decision. There's a provincial regulating body that the club has to work through. But we would try to work with them to find something that worked. And then we would assess whether or not we thought it could be held at the downtown at that time.
When there wasn't 2 other events, 3 other events? and a road closure happening downwind.
One of the things that arts and event staff are working on is a policy that deals with road closures. That's something they've been trying to bring to council for several years. It is right now in draft form, and we're trying to finalize it to bring it to council sometime this summer or early in the fall, which might help to mitigate some of these issues.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
I recall from your presentation previously that the proposed location of Glacier Drive was in RMCC's opinion not suitable for a successful event.
Yeah, they did note some challenges with grade and a curve and aesthetics.
Okay. There are further questions at this time? Seeing none, thanks for your report.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
There's nowhere to sit, and I'm the next one, so if it's okay, can I just stay?
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Given some previous conversation that I've had, I'm going to move one of the alternative suggestions rather than the recommended motion. So I'll move at this time that council support the request of the Rundle Mountain Cycling Club to host the crit in downtown Rundle Mountain. In downtown Canmore, and ask them to work with the Plaid Goat Mountain Bike Festival to stage a combined event for the June 24th weekend, with the crit being held during the morning hours. Speaking to that motion, I recognize that it is a popular event locally. There's a lot of cyclists in Canmore that look forward to that event. While it didn't work that well last year or in the afternoon, I'm prepared to 1 year at least try it in the morning and see if it if it reduces the amount of number of traffic issues that occur around that event. Councillor Seeley speaking to the motion.
Thank you, Your Worship. I support the motion. I think it's important to host a crit downtown and stage the event in the morning. That helps with mitigating some things. And I do think traffic mitigation is important. I think if you have flag people at 8th and 8th, it can keep the traffic moving reasonably, control pedestrians too. All that kind of clutters up. The four-way stop is quite confusing there. And since Main Street's closed, the second area would probably be Railway and 10th. I think that needs to be managed as well. Otherwise, it gets backed up, and even with good management at 8th and 8th, you'll still have a problem. So both those intersections are important. And the Rundle Mountain Cycling Club has hosted the event for several years. They've had some success, they've had some challenges, but I think it is a good community event, and it supports youth programs. So I do support that.
Councillor Kraustert.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just had a question of clarification. When you were speaking to the motion, you indicated that, try it again for this year. What's your anticipation, or what would the direction be to administration for subsequent years?
I guess there's no specific direction in this motion, but my expectation would be that after the event, there would be more detailed analysis of the success and work done with the RMCC to either agree to have the event downtown in future years or not.
Okay. Would you consider a friendly amendment to include that with the understanding that in future years the event would be outside of the downtown area?
Subject to the success of this year, you mean?
Yeah.
Would be, so read that, or?
Well, okay, so, no, I'm just wondering if we're going to end up in the exact same situation a year from now.
Sure. So friendly amendment could be to add for 2017.
Yeah, yeah, I would appreciate if that were a friendly amendment. Right. And then speaking to the motion, I'm very supportive of the RMCC. I'm supportive of how it engages our community, or a section of our community, as we have seen today by the number of letters that we received, which, as a side note, I would appreciate that they were all very positive letters and supportive, and it's an excellent way to engage. And I'm appreciative of the way that the RMCC has engaged with administration. I am concerned about the downtown location for reasons that have been stated by administration. And we are losing our shoulder season, and any weekend almost is problematic to have that sort of closure. I did have the opportunity to put this to the BRZ board as a question to get some feedback as to what they thought, and there was no outstanding cry for this race to continue in the downtown area. There was no concern at all if it were to go from the downtown area. They saw the benefit of the race, but they didn't like the location. That said, I will support this motion, as I believe it's a fair solution for this particular year, and it is my hope that it will either go absolutely swimmingly and there will be no complaints and it will be great, or another location will be found for subsequent years.
Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's a really commendable attempt to try and get a bad situation some form of a positive solution. I have one concern. We're being told that we're going to have them work with the plaid goat people. In the absence of someone here from the plaid goat group saying, yo, no problem, I'm happy to work alongside, I think we may be overstepping ourselves to be imposing this on the plaid goat people. They're running a separate function like that.
Through the chair? May I address that through the chair to Councillor Russell?
Well, I will. It was administration's been working with plaid goat organizers and have complete buy-in on the sharing of the facility. Is there something else?
I did speak to the organizer of the plaid goat today, and she is very supportive of this. So I don't think we're overstepping our bounds there.
I appreciate the comment. In the absence of the knowledge that you've had and that administration's had, my point was to try to indicate that there's a potential conflict. That said, I'm not sure how I feel with this. It's a compromise, but if we're simply postponing this to try to come back to it, I don't know that we're doing anybody any favors. Councillor Krauser commented that all the positive support. There were 2 letters received this afternoon that were not particularly positive. And if we're going to have to make a hard decision, I'd rather make it now, and let's not try and create false expectations for the future.
Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd be inclined to support your motion because I think if we try something different, if we try the morning session to run the race, we might see a different outcome. And as suggested, if we have a good collaborative discussion about post-race, we can decide that if morning is adequate, and if it changes anything, then for next year, if the Rundle Mountain Cycling Club wants to host on a different weekend, at this point in time, I don't think they can change the weekend. So we're kind of looking at making it work for this year, but if for next year, the weekend might be another option. If the morning doesn't work and the weekend is changed, I just think that we should give it the best shot because it's something that's already been in the works and it's a bit of a gap this year. So I will support the motion to try the morning session.
Councillor Comfort.
I'll be happy to support this motion. Mrs. Former school board trustee, it's all about the kids for me. And this is a wonderful event for children. Provides a safe place for them to race, an easy place for the parents to spectate, and I think it's a great event. I have some concerns also, but I'm convinced of the goodwill of the Plaid Goat Mountain Bike Festival, because they also are, it's a launch event for them, more or less, and the collaboration can only bring good things. I feel a little bad about putting extra work to our road crews and so forth, event people, and I recognize that that's a problem, and I think some of the new systems that have been put in place for screening events and seeing who gets which weekend and so forth will work well eventually. And it's a good thing for our community that we're so in demand. It's further validation that we live in a beautiful place and people want to be here. I do expect everyone to work hard to make it work, and given that goodwill, I'm convinced that it will.
Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. Response to Councillor Russell through the chair, I actually had an opportunity to speak to the organizer of the event about an hour before this council meeting and asked her the same question, and she gave me the exact same answer that Dr. Cottle has given us. So just to close up that trifecta, I actually have an amendment that I'd like to propose to council. All the amendment states is that I'd like to see notification occur to all of South Canmore, just not those that are affected on the race course rather. I actually did bear the brunt. I had the opportunity actually of seeing this race last year with my kids. It was great. But I did bear the brunt of about 7 or 8 people that came up to me from South Canmore that were quite unhappy with the road closure. Some of them knew about it and some of them did not. And so this amendment is meant to encapsulate those that did not, that were farther back in South Canmore and perhaps did not read it in the paper. And I'm just looking for council support on this.
By notified, you mean simply delivering a letter?
In the exact same way that all the other folks that are on the course themselves are notified.
Are you thinking that's something that the cycling club would do, or town staff?
I'm actually not sure who does the notification. It sounded that the cycling club does that. Is that correct? Or is it the town?
May I speak?
Yeah.
Thank you. Generally, that is on the event producer to do those notifications. We actually had an event meeting this afternoon and recognized if council were to go in this direction that it might be an extenuating circumstance where we need to support RMCC given this circumstance. So we would work with them to ensure notification was properly done. What exactly that looks like, I don't know, but I'm confident that we could work it out together with some support from admin to do that effectively.
Okay, so there's an amending motion on the floor to add that direction to the primary motion. Is there discussion on the amending motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Back to the primary motion as amended then.
Your Worship.
You have more?
I do.
Go ahead.
So I'm a firm believer in that I can get some of what I want, but not all of what I want. So this is really important to me, and I hear around the table that there's quite a bit of support for allowing the race to continue this year downtown. I unfortunately don't agree. So I'm going to be voting against the actual main motion, but I'm pleased to see the support from the majority for this piece, this amendment to the motion. Yeah, I bore the brunt of a lot of those comments in person, and I think that if this were to take place next year, with not as many events stacked and without the Main Street closure, that it would be fine. We wouldn't be having this conversation today. But I think that this year is a special year based on how busy it's going to be. It's the last weekend in June. A lot of events stacked downtown, and unfortunately, I don't think I can support the main motion.
Councillor Krausert? Nothing? Councillor Russell, did you have something else?
Yes, Your Worship, thank you. I'm somewhat in the same position as Councillor McCollum on this. I've heard other than the blast of emails that all came yesterday and today, I've heard very little positive. And I'm really torn with this because anybody in any sport, you like your high-end, you like your stuff. It's all got to go. This didn't get off the ground. With all the different things that have impacted on this, now there's a problem. And then unfortunately, this was the lucky year that we're rebuilding roads. We are going to have traffic nightmares. And I shudder because the cycling club is going to take an awful battering that they're not totally entitled to because it's not fully their impact on the roads, but the collective impact is going to be difficult. And it's just destined for a lot of bad things. In my mind, I see lots of bad negatives coming out of this, and I just don't feel comfortable supporting it, so I won't be.
Councillor Comfort?
No,
you good? Any further discussion then on the motion as amended? See none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried with Councillors McCallum and Russell in opposition. Moving on then to the next item, E1, the Para-Nordic World Cup event support.
Your Worship and members of Council, I'm here to ask that Council endorse the 2017 Para-Nordic World Cup and approve the provision of facility in-kind support with respect to facility use, and that Council direct administration to work with the 2017 Para-Nordic World Cup organization on appropriate equipment, volunteer, and marketing support options. So at the beginning of April, the organizers of this event gave a presentation to Council and asked for support of all those things. The town of Canmore has a long-standing positive working relationship with the organizers of ski races for many years and many races. The Civic Center has been used as a staging ground for opening, medal, and closing ceremonies for ski events that have been held at the Nordic Center. And this has been done largely to bring racers and race attendees into the downtown core and to create a sense of vibrancy and hub in the downtown. So this request that they're asking for is no different from support that's been provided in previous years. The support, I have been able to clarify with them since they were here in front of Council. In terms of the endorsement, they're looking for a general letter of support signed by the mayor, which is something that we do as a standard of course, and it would not be a problem to do, and an introduction to key partners at Rome. Both of those can easily be provided. Facility in-kind support is the use of the plaza, sometimes the atrium, and potentially some other interior space for staging for their ceremonies and events. And again, we have been able to work that out quite nicely with ski events. And then the third is around equipment, volunteer, and marketing support. And administration believes that we can work with them on this ask appropriately as we have in past events. So this may include things from our IT team. They have occasionally provided our portable sound system for ceremonies. In the event that the equipment we have is not sufficient or not available, organizers rent from a third-party system. We would use the same criteria here. They did ask for volunteer support, and while we are not able to provide volunteers, we do have channels where we can post that they're recruiting or looking for volunteers, and would be happy to do that. And then they have asked for several things around marketing. Some we can provide and some we cannot. They want us to negotiate reduced rates with the Outlook. We don't do that. The Outlook has their own non-for-profit rates, and that's done through the event organizer and the Outlook. They asked for inclusion in the Christmas in Canmore advertising. That was an undertaking of Canmore Business and Tourism, not the town of Canmore. So obviously we can't provide that. But we can work with them, as we have in all previous years, for things around Main Street banners and other signage. We already have a process for managing requests for banner changes on Main Street and other signage around town, and we would just work with the process that we already have. So administration believes that their asks are within reason and similar to past events, and that we could just work with them. If council is not comfortable and you want more specifics, you could delay the decision until their event permit has been received. We're about to go through our next round of event permitting, so that would likely be in July before we have the specifics there. There is an error in the report in terms of financial impacts. We did actually just recently charge the ski nationals, which were held in March, were charged for use of the facility. They were charged for a facility monitor, the atrium, and the plaza to the tune of $275. So the point is, it's not a significant ask. It's not something that the bill is significant for. So that's all I have, unless council has questions.
Councillor Krauser.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Dr. Cottle. Just a clarification around the banners downtown. Isn't the BRZ involved in managing that? So it's not a matter of the town just doing it. There would be a consultation with the BRZ.
That's right. There's an entire process. The request goes into the BRZ. The BRZ is trying to take over some of what Canmore Business and Tourism was doing in terms of banner changeout. Sometimes our staff are involved in doing the changeout, and we have an agreement with BRZ of how many of those we can provide, but it's contingent on, if we have a heavy snowfall, changing banners on Main Street is not the priority. So it's contingent on staff availability. Yeah. We are part of that process, but it is led by the BRZ, and we would just help this event navigate that process.
Right, and I believe that when the BRZ gets requests, usually the person requesting, they'll have to pay to cover the cost. It's not insignificant work to change that out. So
the cost of the banners are expensive, and the cost of changing them out can be very expensive.
Yeah, because it's two changes, putting them up, putting them down, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, so that would be worked out in the regular channels.
We have a process for that already, and we would just use the process that already exists.
Great, thank you.
So, looking at the wording in your report around the community event policy, would you be considering this a base level of support?
Yes.
Right. So any expenses would be handled within currently approved department budgets?
Correct.
Are there any other questions at this time? Councillor Comfort?
This is a bit of a speculative question, but in more than one report, you've mentioned that costs of events are being tracked so you can better monitor, manage, and assess event fees in the future. Mm-hmm. Can we anticipate a policy coming forward, perhaps in 2018, that will address this?
Absolutely, yes. We already have a policy, our recreation, I forget the exact title, recreation user fee policy that has a model and a hierarchy. So for example, we charge minor soccer for the use of a soccer field, but we don't charge, because they go through a different department, we don't charge events for the same field. So we're working to streamline that and have it be more consistent throughout the community. But in order to do that, we need to understand what we are charging for, what we aren't charging for, and have some data. So that's what we're collecting this year, and then it will be a policy that comes to council in the future, yes.
And then attendant costs as well.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor McCallum?
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for your presentation, Dr. Cottle. At the last meeting, and I noticed that this wasn't, unless I missed it, addressed in this report, I had asked a question with regards to the Para-Nordic World Cup's other partners, which is up at the Nordic Centre, which is owned by the provincial government. Do we have an idea as to what kind of in-kind support is being offered by the Nordic Centre? Because that wouldn't be something that would come to a public meeting because it's provincial. I was wondering if you had any idea about that.
Yeah, I did ask that of the event organizers, but I am not at liberty to disclose their arrangement with the provincial government around that. So
okay.
I don't have an answer, sorry.
Thank you. How transparent.
Is there any other questions at this time? Seeing none, thanks for your report. And then at this time, I'll move that council endorse the 2017 Para-Nordic World Cup and approve the provision of facility and kind support with respect to facility use, and that council direct administration to work with the 2017 Para-Nordic World Cup organizers on appropriate equipment, volunteer, and marketing support options. To the motion, Councillor Krauser.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to propose an amendment, please. This is just being specific with regards to the type of endorsement as described in the report, as I have a concern with just a general endorsement, given that the organization is applying for community grant funds, and I wouldn't want council to undermine that process. So I'd like to insert after the word cup, it read, in the form of a letter from the mayor, so that the motion reads that council endorse the 2017 Para-Nordic World Cup in the form of a letter from the mayor. I was inclined to vote against this simply because I didn't want to get in the way of the community grant process and open up the doors. I actually don't think that they need to come to council to get a letter from the mayor, and so I'm fine with having it simply be that, and I would be able to support this motion with that clarification.
I'll have no problem supporting the amendment. As noted before, it is fairly standard for event organizers to ask for that simple sort of an endorsement, primarily to be used in seeking funding from other organizations. But I'm happy to accept that amendment to bring clarity to the motion. Is there other discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, I'll call a question on Councillor Krauser's amending motion. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Back into the main motion as amended. Is there further discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Moving on then to item F1, Wildlife Attractant Bylaw. Mrs. Risling-Wynn.
Good evening, Mayor Borman, members of council. I'm here again this afternoon to bring forward for your consideration two bylaws, actually. The first one being Bylaw 2017-10, Wildlife Attractant Bylaw, and the second is an amending bylaw of the Animal Control Bylaw, which is 2017-24. So why the bylaw? Just a quick recap. I won't go over all of the details that we discussed on the April 11th, 2017 Committee of the Whole meeting. But you do recall that we discussed a number of recurring issues with respect to wildlife attractants in the community and some of the challenges and the concerns that come along with that. In addition to the concerns that were identified, we also discussed the fact that there was a strong desire in the community to have a bylaw to address these issues and have it be a standalone bylaw and not a number of provisions that were buried in another bylaw, so have a standalone bylaw. So again, the purpose of the bylaw being to increase public safety, to reduce negative human-wildlife interactions, and reduce nuisances caused by wildlife entering the community. Of course, the bylaw also enables our peace officers to address these issues if and when they arise. So the main provisions of the bylaw, as you may recall, really four key things, and a fifth one has been added, which I'll speak to in a moment. The first being storage of wildlife attractants. It also addresses fruit and fruit trees, the feeding of wildlife, bird feeders, and we added pigeons. There is currently a provision in the Animal Control Bylaw that speaks specifically to pigeons that we hadn't contemplated, but we felt it needs to be included because we have had recurring issues with people feeding pigeons, so we felt it was important to put it in here, and in here rather than in the Animal Control Bylaw. So after our conversation on April 11th, We also did a legal review of the draft bylaw, and so some edits were incorporated in the version that was in your agenda package that addressed some of the concerns raised by council at that time, as well as with respect to the legal review. So within the interpretation section, we did add language to add clarity to what a substance that may attract wildlife may include, and that language was provided by our legal counsel. An exception was added to section 3.1 to enable our contractors who are working on our feral rabbit control program to do that work without violating the wildlife attractant bylaw. And the piece about pigeons was added in section 3.6. So when approving the wildlife attractant bylaw, it's also necessary to make some amendments to the animal control bylaw to avoid duplication. Again, the idea that we would like to have it in this one standalone bylaw rather than repeated in a number of different bylaws. And the pieces that will be removed are the piece regarding storage, the provision regarding pigeons, and the provision regarding bird feeders. So with that, the recommendation is that council give first, second, and third reading to both the Animal Attractant Bylaw 2017-10 and the Animal Control Bylaw Amendment 2017-24. Happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you very much. And are there questions from council at this time? Councillor Krausert, did you have a question?
I'll take the opportunity to just point something out now since you called on me. It's just an editorial item on 2017-24, section 2.1. It should read removing sections 22, 23, and 24. So I'll just leave that as an editorial. Thanks.
So we'll consider that an editorial change. Councillor Russell?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm looking at your definition of wildlife attractant, and when I understand your explanation that our contractors are working with wildlife attractants, but if we start to drag that down to lettuce and all the garden greens that they find themselves using, does that maybe take us into a different territory, or does it become an unnecessary? You've said in your definition, attractant for potentially dangerous. The rabbits likely haven't killed a lot of people these days, but if we're handling the greens, you know, stuff like vegetable greens and stuff, if we're going to lump that in with that, are we crossing into funny territory with people with their gardens?
So it would be specifically for the purposes of the feral rabbit control program. So they would be permitted to carry on doing the work that they do using whatever materials that they currently use to attract wildlife, and only for that, if that answers your question.
Not really.
Okay.
What I'm saying, I guess, is my experience watching the rabbit trappers doing their thing is they're using common garden type vegetables. But if you're referencing that in 3.1, other than a person appointed by the CAO collect and dispose of wildlife attractants, it's just, to me, it's clunky wording, and I don't have an offer to give you a better wording for it. I'm sorry, but it seems to be a bit confusing.
The intent of the provision really was just to allow peace officers or anyone appointed by the CAO to do that. Yeah, and so it wasn't meant to capture vegetable gardens or that type of
Fair
thing.
enough.
Yeah, I appreciate the clunkiness of it, though.
Councillor Comfort?
This is very picky, but there's another typo.
Okay, great.
So on that same page where I had that circled, 23, should it be 22?
Okay.
Item 24.
Yep.
Bird feed is capitalized. So unless you mean some kind of special capitalized bird feed, should be a small b.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Are there any other questions at this time then for Ms. Seeing none, thanks very much, and appreciate the conversation that we engaged in at the Committee of the Whole on the draft bylaw. That helped quite a bit in understanding the direction and the intent. So with that, I'll move the council give first reading to Wildlife Attractant Bylaw 2017-10. Speaking to that bylaw, I'm happy to support it. The town of Canmore has been quite intentional for a long time, 15 years or more, to address the issues that we have of when wildlife are attracted into the town through, particularly through garbage and other such attractants. In the past, had always often resulted in the untimely death of the wildlife. So I see this as one further refinement of the work that the town of Canmore has frankly been leaders in mountain communities for some time. So I'm happy to support this bylaw. Councillor Comfort?
Yes, I will also, and I just want to say kudos to Ms. Wynn for working with us on this and other issues, but this has been good to get salted away. And also to mention that there's that movie showing tomorrow night, Living with Wildlife, and one of the prime reasons behind that movie was to show how Canmore was a leader in techniques of managing wildlife and things like the bear winds and so forth that are not done in other communities. So this is another initiative in that direction.
Is there other discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. I'll then move the council give second reading to Wildlife Attractant Bylaw 2017-10. Is there discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. I'll seek leave from council to go to third reading of Bylaw 2017-10. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And I'll then move that council give third reading to Wildlife Attractant Bylaw 2017-10. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Now I'll move the council give first reading to Animal Control Bylaw Amendment 2017-24, Animal Attractants. Is there discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. I'll move the council give second reading to Animal Control Bylaw Amendment 2017-24, Animal Attractants. Discussion on that motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. I'll seek leave from council to go to third reading of the Animal Control Bylaw Amendment. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And I'll move the council give third reading to Animal Control Bylaw Amendment 2017-24, Animal Attractants. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Moving on then to item F2, Bylaw 2017-01 and 2017-02, Resort Center MDP and ASP amendments. Councillor Russell?
Perhaps just in the interest of some convenience all the way around, might it be prudent to take a short break now? Let those who aren't here for this issue make their way, take a small break, and then we can proceed uninterrupted with Mr. Fark.
If there's anybody in the room that's not here for this item, you're welcome to say bye-bye at this point. Let's proceed. Mr. Fark.
Mayor Borman, members of council, thank you very much. I will start off with a very brief preliminary set of points for your information, and then I will be handing the presentation over to Ms. Bartenko, who will continue. So I will start off perhaps first by answering the question from the lady earlier this evening around the Fiera report and the addendum by Golder. Given the timelines that we are dealing with, and also given the costs that have been incurred in the process to this point, the situation we are currently in is that there is clearly disagreement between the third-party reviewer, Fiera, and Golder in regards to perspectives on the environmental impact statement. In order to address this, administration has invited both consultants, Golder and Fiera, to attend second reading, to be present, to field questions from council, and to give that opportunity for council to seek clarity of any questions or disagreements that they may perceive. This was felt by administration to be the most appropriate and expedient way and public way of allowing questions and concerns around the EIS and the third-party review to be addressed. So that is an answer to the earlier question. In regards to the matter before you this evening, the first reading of the Resort Center ASP amendment application, a couple of points from the side of administration. The first one being that first reading is not a formality. First reading is the first opportunity for council to give consideration to the bylaw. It is council's opportunity to give formal consideration of the bylaw. It is important because without first reading, there is no certainty. So by giving first reading to the bylaw, the public, council, and the applicant have certainty as to what is actually being considered and what is being discussed. With that certainty comes the opportunity then for the public and the proponent, people both for and against the application, to come forward at a public hearing and to express their opinions on in support or in opposition to the application, and to know what it is that they are speaking to. First reading and a public hearing in administration's perspective is an important part of the process of consideration of a bylaw, and it is therefore our recommendation that council give the bylaw first reading to allow the public, and as you may have noticed, I believe there is significant public interest in this matter, and those who would like to speak to the bylaw, to give the public the opportunity and the proponent the opportunity to speak to the bylaw, and therefore, afterwards, to have council given the opportunity to give consideration and to weigh in the balance the matter before them. There was
Just one moment, please, Councillor Russell, you have a question?
My apologies, Mr. Fark. I'm stepping on a process here, but you made a statement. You said that the first reading is a chance to present what's being considered so that the public can have input. But you just prior to that said we're inviting the two parties to the EIS to come in at second reading. Would we not want a proper informed public hearing to have everything we got? If we're putting stuff out after the public hearing, maybe we're putting the horse before the cart here.
Yeah. So the process is one that is set out in such a way as to give the opportunity for the airing of public concerns. So we cannot anticipate at this time, especially at first reading, what all of the input from the public might be in regards to a matter. So traditionally, there is always a response at second reading to matter of any bylaw, to matters heard from the public hearing, and consideration is given to that both in the administrative analysis and in the potential recommendations. In regards to the environmental study, the reports, it is the position of administration, speak for themselves. There are two conflicting views in terms of how the environmental impact should be assessed, and we are not anticipating that new information will be provided by either consultant as part of the question and answer that will be provided at second reading. What we're intending to do is to give the consultants, or to allow the consultants to be present, to give council the opportunity to ask questions and delve into any questions of unclarity that they may have. So we would consider that to be a normal part of the process, and also gives the council the opportunity to hear from the public and know what questions they may want to ask the consultants. Whereas at this point, we may not have all of that information. So the, again, process recommendation of administration is public hearing first, and then additional opportunities for clarification at second reading.
I guess I'm sorry, I take exception to your point with the, we're looking to max out the value of the collective brain trust and the public. If we're going to come back with there's two reports, there's two conflicting opinions. If we don't have a go forward on that at all, which I'm guessing from what you're advising me, we will have something at second reading that's a go forward position. We're cutting out a lot of potential, does it force us back to a second public hearing? Does it, it just seems seems like we're going too fast here.
Yeah, fair enough. There is always the possibility that issues that arise during the public hearing or amendments that arise at second reading or proposed amendments that arise at second meeting, should they be approved, would be substantive enough that a second public hearing may be required. We can only move forward based on the best information that we have currently. Currently, we have the information from the two consultants' reports. In terms of a go-forward position, I don't know what that looks like at this point. The consultants have submitted their reports, and the conclusions of both consultants are quite clear, and they are in opposition. Ultimately, it will be the decision of council how they would choose to interpret those two reports and how they would wish to place the emphasis. And that would be the reason for allowing the public to provide their input on the reports, and then have council have the opportunity to hear that input through the public hearing, and then have the opportunity to ask questions of those consultants at second reading. If we were to bring the consultants forward now, the public would, I guess you could look at it from that perspective. If you were to bring the consultants now, would there be additional value? Potentially. I guess that is a decision for council to consider. With the process as it has been laid out, we are trying to give everybody the opportunity to hear the full information, and then for council to be able to make an informed decision.
Which is exactly why,
Okay.
you've answered my question, thank you.
You did say that the applicant would be, well, the applicant's always at public hearing to present and answer questions.
That is correct.
Would the applicant have their Golder there as well, that opportunity to?
I expect that the applicant will have their consultant present with them at the public hearing. However, the intent is to have both consultants present so that they can field questions from council at the same time.
Right. So at the public hearing, there would be opportunity for those questions to be asked and answered?
Council has the opportunity to ask questions for clarification at the public hearing to the applicant.
Thank you. Carry on with your report.
So there was a question regarding the level of analysis that was provided at this phase for first reading. So once again, the intent of first reading is to make clear for the public and for council what is being considered, and to allow the scheduling of a public hearing. The standard process for administration is to introduce the bylaw, to provide a certain level of information for council's understanding and consideration. And then it is the standard process that, especially with the more complex bylaws, as is the case with this one, that we would then provide in-depth analysis and potential amendments for changing to the bylaw at second reading. There's a final point we would like to make, that first reading of the bylaw is also the opportunity for us to make a referral to the province, the various agencies of the province, in order to gather feedback from them. So in absence of a formal first reading, or put another way, it is the first reading of the bylaw that instigates the referral to the province for a request for specific information and for their review of the elements of the bylaw that are relevant for their jurisdiction. Administration is of the position that we have a number of outstanding questions to the province that we are seeking information from them on. The referral process is what allows us to gather that, or to request that information formally, and we are of the opinion that council, the public, and the applicant would benefit from the clarity that the province would bring to the discussion should they have the opportunity to answer those questions. Having with that, I will answer any further questions you might have, or I will pass it over to Ms. Watenko.
Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for your presentation. I was wondering if you could expand more on the questions that you're looking to get through the referral process from the province, the outstanding questions that council and administration have with regards to the application.
Certainly. So there are two key areas that are of considerable concern, public concern, and for which we have been seeking clarity. The first one is on the issue of undermining. Mayor Borman spoke to that earlier. We've been having ongoing discussions with the province for some time. We have 3 specific questions into them in a formal request for information or response, and we are optimistic that we will get a response from them on that. The second one is regards to the effective width of the wildlife corridor in relation to the resort center. So as you may recall, the original designation of the wildlife corridor for the resort center occurred in 1998. There was then an adjustment made to the corridor in 2002. There was a report that accompanied that adjustment that spoke to the golf course area, providing effective width to the wildlife corridor. It was part of the discussion around soft edge versus hard edge. And given that the current ASP contemplates development on the golf course lands, we've requested that the province provide clarity as to whether or not clarity as to their position regarding the effective width, and whether or not the golf course lands are required in order to facilitate the functioning of the wildlife corridor.
Thank you. And why wouldn't they just tell us that now?
That's a very good question. We have inquired in the past. I believe that, once again, the formal consideration and giving first reading allows us to refer the question to them in a way that sets a timeline to it and makes clear to them why we need this now as a pressing matter, and hopefully that will allow them to allocate the resources to address it.
So basically, without first reading, we do not get answers to questions that have been weighing on us for a while. However, do we have any assurity that the province will respond before third reading?
We don't have any assurance that the province will respond before third reading. And without first reading, it is possible that at some future point we may get a response from the province. Again, the intent of the process is it allows for a formal request.
Yes, I agree. Thank you very much.
Councillor Krausert.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Mr. Fark. I know that Ms. Wotanko will be presenting, but I thought that I would ask this. It's sort of a process question around public hearings. The analysis of alternatives indicates that council could hold a public hearing prior to giving first reading to the proposed bylaw. I just wanted to question that. I know we could, but I'm just wondering whether that's actually effective, because A, there wouldn't be certainty around what is being held, a public hearing is being held for, and that my understanding is the last time that we contemplated such things, advice given to us was that we'd have to hold another public hearing prior to second reading, once we've given it first reading as well.
So certainly council has the prerogative to set a public hearing prior to first reading. The MGA requires that a public hearing occur prior to second reading. It doesn't say when prior to second reading. As the report indicates, the potential advantage of setting a public hearing prior to first reading is that the applicant would have the opportunity to take into consideration what they hear at the public hearing and potentially make amendments to their application. The difficulty then is you get into a cycle of perpetual delays and amendments. So if they make substantive changes, does that then require again a new public hearing? And at what point do you draw the line? To your point around certainty, the advantage of providing first reading to the bylaw and then having the public hearing is that once first reading is given, the bylaw belongs to council. And it is their prerogative then to advance it to public hearing and to make amendments at second and third reading. And they have certainty over what is being discussed and what is being considered by virtue of giving it first reading. There is still the possibility that at second reading, substantial amendments may be proposed that may necessitate a further public hearing. That could be part of the process. But at least we're starting from a point of certainty, which is why administration recommends starting with first reading.
Great, thank you. And one other question then, relating to the current discussions that are with the province regarding clarity around the undermining issue. Does the province assess and screen the undermining as it pertains to municipal infrastructure?
So the short answer is that the province does not assess or screen anything. The undermining regulations require 2 engineering certificates, one engineering certificate by the proponent, and then a second engineering certificate by an independent third party that was not part of preparing the original application for development. What the province does is they ensure that those 2 engineering stamps are in place. And assuming that they are in place, then the province is of the position that their due diligence in regards to the undermining or potential undermining constraints has been fulfilled.
And do those stamps pertain to municipal infrastructure?
In times, yes, they do.
Okay. And have recently, what's the position of the province with respect to any failures on the property? Will they cover that?
So again, I think we would prefer to answer that question once we get further clarity from the province. That is one of the questions that we have, we would like to place to them, and we are trying to get clarity on. So I would prefer to await that response prior to answering.
Thank you.
I gather that Ms. Wojtanko will be speaking to the body of the report.
She will.
So we can wait and ask her questions that are specific to the report, unless you have something else to add.
I have nothing further.
Thank you. Ms. Wojtanko?
Thank you, and good evening, Council. So I won't go too much in the background, as just Mike spoke to a lot of important points. So to jump right into the recommendation, it is that Council give first reading to Bylaw 2017-01 to amend the MDP, and Bylaw 2017-02 to amend the Resort Centre ASP. And secondly, to set a public hearing date for May 23rd, 2017. So first I'm going to go back into some of the Three Sisters Mountain Village planning context. So when we're looking at applications for amending things like area structure plans, we look at a number of sources. So first off, we have our municipal development plan, which Council did just recently approve September last year. We also, for this application in particular, look at the NRCB decision, number 9103, and that was from 1992, which was the approval of the recreational and tourism project. We also take into consideration the master zoning bylaw, which is also referred to as DC 198, and that's a bylaw which is within our land use bylaw, and the accompanying settlement agreement. And the reason for that is in 1998, there was an agreement between the town of Canmore and Three Sisters to provide a reasonable certainty, a reasonable level of certainty of use, and to put into place some zoning and approval mechanisms which are generally consistent with the NRCB decision. And that's why we take that into context for this application. And lastly, we also take into consideration other town policies, plans, and guidelines. So for example, we have our environmental impact statement policy, our Steep Creek hazard and risk policy, and you'll notice that both of those 2 policies are also brand new. They came in about the time of the updated MDP. We have our engineering, design, and construction guidelines, mountainous terrain guidelines, and utility master plans. And that's just a sample of some of the other policies or guidelines that are considered in area structure plan applications. So there is currently an existing resort center area structure plan, and if you go back and look at the history of planning for Three Sisters, it was based upon sites 1 and 3 in the original DC 198. We really now just refer to that as Site 1. Site 3 was kind of amalgamated into Site 1. It was approved back in 2004. And following the approval of this area structure plan, there were some subsequent land use bylaw amendments. So this is the approved 2004 land use concept. I didn't put the legend in because it's very hard to read the legend on these big screens. But what you can see is the dark green area is the golf course. The areas labeled A, B, C, and D are resort accommodation areas. And the red and the pinky are the commercial areas. And then you can see the surrounding lands in the lighter green are wildlife corridor or more environmental lands. So the zoning that followed the approval of the area structure plan, this came in about 2007. There's the two areas of resort accommodation, area A and B, which have been rezoned. So that has current land use approval. There's also the resort core, which is the TSRC, that has zoning, as well as the golf course, which is zoned the GRD. And then you can see the remainder of the area, the DC 198 Site 1, which is on the left side of the screen, closer to the Tipple Wildlife Corridor. That still has the original DC 198 zoning on it, so that would need zoning prior to development. So the ASP amendment application is shown here on the map for the resort center. You'll note, if you look closely between the two documents, there is a slight boundary adjustment closer to the cairns of the Bow area. I think it's about 3 hectares of land was removed from the area structure plan boundary. So the process to get to where we are now, the applicant submitted an initial submission back in 2016 in October. Since then, we've gone through a couple of renditions. We've been giving them some feedback on the application. A lot of the feedback that has been put forward from administration is with respect to updating policies to new town planning policies. So for example, does it match the direction of our new MDP, our environmental policies, steep creek hazards, those sorts of things. The applicant has provided a number of supporting technical documents. You can see from the thickness of the binder that there was quite a few reports done. I'm not going to go into detail of these, but what they did submit was a stormwater management plan, a transportation impact assessment, a fiscal impact analysis, and an environmental impact statement. And so those documents are on our website. We also have copies of the application here at the town office that you can view. We also have a copy at the library. So if you don't want to sit and read a long document on your screen, members of the public can go to the library or come here to look at those copies. So I'm just going to give a brief background of what's proposed to change in the area structure plan amendment. So the biggest thing is the elimination of the golf course. So that was that large dark green area. And instead of a golf course, the proposal is the expansion of the resort core area, resort expansion area, and resort accommodation areas. Another change is the inclusion of, and very specific inclusion of residential uses, as well as a new private recreation zone and open space and recreation area. So this is what the amended land use concept looks like. So you can see the areas of A and B, C and D of resort accommodations. Those have stayed approximately the same. The resort core and the resort expansion area approximately doubled. You can see area F, which shows it as kind of a combination area, but it could be open spaces and parks, or resort accommodation or residential. And area E is a resort accommodation or residential area. So to get into a little bit of detail of some of the proposed amendments, the increase of gross developable area from the approved area structure plan is proposed to increase from 95 hectares to 120 hectares. So the total area of land within the ASP itself is about 303 hectares. And once you take away the land for wildlife corridors and park spaces, there's about 160 hectares of land available for development. So somewhere in that 160 hectares of land would be 120 hectares of development. The proposal is also to increase the unit allocation from the maximum of 2,525 units to 3,000 units.
Just on that point, that would then, if this was approved, that would then reduce the number of units that would be possible on the remaining lands, Three Sisters.
That's correct.
Right.
Yeah. If the maximum was built out in Resort Center, yes, there would be less available for the other areas. So just to show you what this actually looks like, so in the blue areas, this is the remainder of DC 198 sites. The lines, it's maybe hard to see, that are pink, kind of dotted, those are the original boundaries of DC 198. So as Mr. Fark spoke to, the wildlife corridor in 2002 did change, and so with that, the site boundaries changed. The areas that are in green and pink have already been what we'd call developed. They're either counted for developable area or they did not. If they were, for example, uncredited municipal reserve, they didn't count. And so we have added up the areas, and as per the settlement agreement in DC 198, we need to account for these areas on an annual basis. So the original approval in DC 198 allowed for 306 hectares, and the existing development that's already taken place in sites 2A, 2B, and 6, so that's really the Three Sisters Creek area, is just over 100 hectares, which leaves about 205.2 hectares remaining to be developed. The Resort Center Area Structure Plan, the amendment is proposing to use 120 hectares, which would mean that there would be about 85.2 hectares left for the remainder of Three Sisters lands that are within the DC 198 boundary. And just to point out here that the Thunderstones lands are not within the DC 198 boundary. On the unit accounting side, you can see that we have a column of built or anticipated. So in those sites 2A, 2B, and 6 in the Three Sisters Creek area, we have 1,647 units that are either have been built and are constructed right now or are anticipated to be constructed. So for example, Stewart Creek Phase 3, there aren't any buildings there yet, but each of those lots has been subdivided. So we approximately know there's going to be one unit on this single family lot, or on this multifamily lot, it will contain approximately this number of units. So those have been accounted for already. So what that leaves is 1,710 units of residential, 600 of timeshare or residential, 1,500 resort accommodation, for a total of 3,810. And that's remainder on Three Sisters lands. So if the resort center proposed is built to its maximum, which is 3,000 units, there would be 810 units to use on other Three Sisters lands. Any questions on the unit or GDA accounting?
Presumably, the remaining units would be envisioned for development on the Smith Creek area, if and when that should come back?
Yes, there's also some provision for units on the Stewart Creek lands as well. So for example, staff accommodation does count towards unit accounting. There's a formula, but it also does count. Yeah.
Councillor Sanford?
Thank you, Your Worship. Can you just go back to that slide again? Now, timeshare and residential are in the same category. And where would hotel fit?
So in DC 198, when it was written in 1998, so residential was a specific use. And then it said, well, you can have 600 units of timeshare or residential, and timeshare was more of the commercial use, like a true commercial use. The DC 198 also originally specifically stated visitor accommodation, not resort accommodation. So the visit, like a hotel, which is our visitor accommodation uses, would be the 1,500 or the 600 as well, if you chose the timeshare units instead of residential.
So hotel could fit in both those categories?
Yes.
600 or 1,500?
Yes.
Depending on how it was built out or developed?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And just to your point, to emphasize, so all of the numbers you're referring to what was approved in 1998 through the master bylaw, and which is now in our land use bylaw.
That's correct. Yeah. And any amendments that happened there too, I think it was in 2004, maybe 2002. Can't remember the exact date, but at one point in time, the ownership group of the Three Sisters lands did apply for an amendment to reduce the number of approved units. I think it was by 247 units. So there have been some changes to the numbers over time, but those have been through formal amendments to the bylaw. And so those have been accounted for in here. So going back to some of the proposed changes, to the resort core and expansion area, it's proposed to increase in size to 40 and 50 hectares. That is approximately a doubling in size of the areas that were originally set aside for resort core and resort expansion. And within that increase in area, there's also a proposed increase in commercial gross floor area. Originally, it was approximately 225,000 square feet. The total now could be between 300,000 to 450,000 square feet of commercial, and that's true commercial uses. So for example, retail, health and wellness uses, restaurants, that sort of commercial. That doesn't include hotels. And an additional 75,000 square feet of accessory commercial. So potentially a total of 525,000 square feet of commercial in the resort area. And the change, there's also a change from the focus of primary from health and wellness to retail. So there was in the application rationale showing what it looks like when you take Mescal Close and put it into the resort core. So what I did was I looked at this from a commercial perspective. What does this mean to increase that area, for example, compared to our downtown? So I'm going to explain this map just a little bit. So you can see in the kind of orange areas, that is the resort core and the resort expansion. Do I have a laser? Oh, good point. So this is the resort core area. The resort expansion area is approximately here. I can't drive with my left hand like that. So the proposed expansion of the resort expansion area is here, and the resort core would be here, which is shown on the map down here. So the existing resort core and expansion area, as approved in 2004, is 25 to 30 hectares. What I've done is I've, at the same scale, taken out downtown Canmore, so that's the area in red, and it's about 11 hectares, and that's just the downtown, like the very, main street. And so I've inserted that in so you can see what that would be like if the expansion area was 40 to 50 hectares in size. So it would be 4 to 5 times the size of downtown. So area E, which is the large area in yellow at the bottom, is resort accommodation and residential purposes. And so in the area structure plan, there is a new section 5.5 for housing policies. And this enables affordable housing beyond just employee housing. So the original 2004 area structure plan didn't have any residential policies, so it couldn't have any affordable housing policies beyond employee housing. Area F, which is kind of the hatched area to the east of Three Sisters Creek, says that it could be for open space and recreation purposes, such as a sports field, ice rink, track, playground, washroom, dog parks, etc. But it could also have resort accommodation and/or residential in it.
Just going to ask that people just... Councillor Krausert?
Just on that last slide, one of the things I was curious about with Area F, the thatched part could be recreational. With the potential of those other uses, whether it be resort or residential, would that be on the thatched part as well, or is it on that part that's not thatched?
I believe it could be, so for example...
Or it could be either?
Yeah, it could be,
Okay.
so that it could be either. So the open space and recreation purposes, I believe in this area through the policy, are intended to be municipal reserve. So municipal reserve is a maximum of 10% of the developable area. And so we would need to see how much municipal reserve would be taken and how much land would be left over in that area if it was approved that municipal reserve could go in Area F.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Sanford?
Thank you, Your Worship. There's discussion about private recreation and public recreation. So in that section of F, would that be considered public recreation space?
I believe that's the intent, yes. There is it's hard to see on the screen, but on the southern, well, on the bottom end of the map,
The light green?
there is kind of a green strip here.
Right.
And when I get to the recreation map, it also
Okay.
shows another strip, but that's the private recreation.
Okay. So F would be more or less municipal reserve and public.
That's
what you're thinking.
my belief, the intent, yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
So again, speaking to your point, this is the recreation map. So there is a private recreation zone, and it's, again, along the bottom, closer to the southern boundary, as well as here is the private recreation zone. And the other component of recreation that was included in the amended ASP application is for a larger trail system. In the environment section, we now have the identification of 2 natural wetlands that came out of the EIS statement. Also, that is very important to this area structure plan amendment application, is a new section completely on wildlife mitigation strategies. And these strategies contain mitigations such as off-leash dog parks, a larger internal trail system, landscaping and attractive management, lighting and design standards, wildlife fencing, education and signage, and monitoring and adaptive management. I'm not going to speak too much, but I know the wildlife fencing topic has come up quite a bit. And so the EIS does imply that fencing is a required mitigation, both on the side of keeping wildlife out, but also to better manage human use and behavior. And as we have heard from our consultants, as well as from the public, that there is some uncertainty in predicting human behavior. So how will the fence work on the human side? Which then shows the importance of having really good monitoring and adaptive management. And so there is more policies in the Area Structure Plan Amendment to deal with monitoring and adaptive management. So we did send the environmental impact statement out to be reviewed by our third-party reviewer, which is Fiera Biological. The EIS was essentially ready when we hired Fiera, but we did kind of take a step back and go through an iterative process to get the EIS to where it is now, and our consultants then provided their third-party review of that report. And Golder also prepared an addendum of the report based on that feedback, which Council does have a copy of, and it's in the agenda package as well.
Could I just interrupt with a question there? So when this addendum was presented from Golder through Quantum, did Fiera have any immediate comments, or I mean, what was their feedback to you on A, that there was an addendum, and B, what they thought they'd like to do in response to that.
We're still speaking with our third-party consultant on that. I don't have an answer for you at this time.
Okay, thank you.
So I mentioned that there are some new sections in the area structure plan amendment, like steep creek hazards. So we have identified steep creek hazards as a fairly significant consideration in development proposals. And so we do have a Three Sisters Creek hazard study that was completed by the town shortly after the floods. And so we're looking for cooperation from the applicant towards hazard mitigation for existing and new development. It will take cooperation between both parties. There is significant existing development on the lands for Three Sisters Creek. The phasing of the project is proposed to change. There are additional phases, but generally it's from north to south, east to west.
Councillor Crosthwaite?
What is the rationale of going to 5 and then the 6 and then 7 and 8 last?
I believe it's in the application rationale, but it's to start out with some of the resort accommodation. My understanding is to start out doing, so phase 1 is with some of the resort accommodation and then building some of the commercial. So the commercial is important to the town to be built early, then to proceed with some more resort accommodation and potentially residential, and then the remainder of the commercial would follow after. It can be challenging to develop all commercial first, and so to kind of stagger commercial and residential and resort accommodation.
Okay. Councillor Comfort?
And so when you refer to commercial, are you referring to hotels in that context or not?
So the resort core and resort expansion areas can have both. So if you look through the policy on where the units can be allocated, the resort core and resort expansion area can have resort accommodation units, and I believe they've allocated up to 1,300 units or I forget, or 800 units. I'd have to look exactly, but within the resort core and expansion areas.
Okay, thank you.
So without providing an extremely detailed analysis of the application, as Mr. Fark already mentioned, I'd just like to provide some high-level summary points of some of the areas where we are considering the application. The first one is alignment with previous approvals and town vision for future growth. So that's where I mentioned our MDP, DC 198. Secondly, is how the ASP policy and implementation strategies will achieve the overall comprehensive resort vision. So ensuring that the vision of the resort can be achieved through future planning stages like land use and subdivision and development to make sure those implementation strategies are there. Thirdly, that recreation and open space in the resort center vision can be achieved. And I wanted to focus specifically on that area because recreation is an important component. We wanted to make sure that it is, that there are appropriate implementation strategies.
Councillor Crosthwaite?
Ms. Watenko, just to your first point, alignment with previous approvals and town vision for future growth. But of course, we're here because it's an amendment to the previously approved ASP, so it's a change from that. And the maps that were asked to be changed, that outlines a vision, so we're asked to change that vision, correct? Because we're having to change the maps.
You can still, so for example, the vision might be to have, like this is a resort area with commercial, vibrant commercial area, having hotels. You can, my understanding is that the applicant still wants to move forward with that vision, but change some of the layout, how it is, the numbers,
Okay.
but still moving forward with that vision And so we want to make sure that this aligns with the town's vision.
I just would put a little asterisk that I don't think that's entirely correct. I think that it's aligned with some previous approvals, certain documents, but we're obviously here because a change is being requested.
Yes. So other areas of consideration is the differentiation of resort accommodation and residential uses through policy, and that's in particular land use policy, and that the impact on taxation. So resort accommodation in the land use is specified to be taxed commercially. There is some concern of if you can't differentiate residential from resort accommodation, what enables you to tax it at a commercial rate? Fifthly, the impact of the increase in commercial space, in particular on retail space. Right now, the town of Canmore has just over 1 million square feet of commercial GFA throughout the town. If you combine all Three Sisters lands, and this isn't including Spring Creek or Silvertip, but Three Sisters lands, so Resort Center, Stewart Creek, and Smith Creek, and if you take the maximum commercial areas that can be built out in all of them, it's 2.5 million square feet of commercial GFA at its maximum. Other areas of consideration is the alignment of with town goals of protecting the environment, and phasing of the development to achieve multiple objectives. So for example, when does commercial get phased in? How do we make sure that the public transportation system will work? Do we have that, the density to make that a viable system out there? And lastly, impacts on the larger community transportation network. And finally, one of the smaller points that I wanted to make, and it's in the amendment, or in the proposed motion for the amendment, is to make a few clerical edits throughout the bylaw. These ones are truly clerical. There's a numbering issue. There are two sections 5.5, to do with, I believe, residential and employee housing. Just so you know which section 5.5 you're referring to. The other ones are either just spelling errors or the word Smith Creek have been inserted where it should have been Resort Center. So there are 6 proposed clerical edits. So that was an overview of the ASP amendment. The second bylaw is for an MDP amendment. And the MDP amendment is required for consistency between the area structure plan and the ASP. So 2 maps would require amending, map 2 and map 5. So up here, this is map 2. This is the conceptual land use map. So the current map on the left-hand side shows the resort center here as this kind of reddy maroony color, which is private recreation. And so the proposed amendment, you can see in the hatched area, is to change that from private recreation to resort center. And the amendment to map 5, so in the current map, this kind of browny color represents resort center commercial land uses. And so the proposed amendment is, again, here in the hatched area, to have the whole resort center area be resort center. And any questions of council? That finalizes my presentation.
The red line version that's provided in the report, in the package, there's green and red changes, and just help me understand what the green denotes and what the red denotes.
Sure, so I believe if you look to the first page of the red line, there's a bit of an explanation. So I believe it's the green, and this is submitted by the applicant. Town administration didn't have any involvement in preparing the red line version. Was the applicant's their interpretation of what's being proposed to be amended based on their proposal, and the red is their interpretation of what's being amended to meet town policy. So for example, steep creeks, other environmental considerations or engineering concerns.
So essentially then the changes noted in green reflect what the applicant was initially looking for, and the changes in red reflect their response to what they've heard from planning in regards to other ways that the 2004 ASP could be improved.
No, I wouldn't put it that way either. I would say that it's also their interpretation of policy changes. So for example, when the new MDP comes out, they interpret what they read from that and then said, okay, this is what we're proposing to meet based on this change in the MDP. In some cases, there may have been town administration input into how that interpretation went. But as I said, this red line version, there's been no town input into what they interpreted to be red and green. It's
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Questions from members of council at this time? Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm still struggling with that concept of a private recreation zone being a hiking trail. How would that be a private recreation zone along the border of the fence line?
So within the mitigations for wildlife, one of the things that we've been talking about is if there is a fence approved, and how is that fence maintained? And if the town does take maintenance of that fence, then we would need access to it. And we've also talked about there needing to be vehicle access and potentially a trail along the back. I'm not sure how that fits into the private recreation zone as well. But yes, the applicant has proposed a private recreation area, and there's policies in the area structure plan that talk about what kind of recreation uses may be in there. I can't answer more for the applicant on that as well. There's a bit of unclarity in the sections on recreation that I haven't fully wrapped my head around of what is private and what is actually public. There is some unclarity still in those sections.
Because I thought that one of the mitigations for wildlife encountering is to discourage people from going behind the fence and give them alternative places to go. And if the alternative place is a private place, then I'm not sure that we're going to achieve that goal. You know? So that's why I'm wondering how it can be defined as a private recreation space as opposed to a public.
That's one of the considerations that I did bring up is about how the resort center achieves the vision of recreation. And I believe that could use more clarification from the applicant.
I'll just add, I mean, the easiest example of a private recreation area is, of course, a golf course. That's proposed to change here, so it's undetermined what that could look like. One example is a ropes course or some other such facility. It could just be open space that is not actually on public land, that is privately owned, and that there would be private maintenance of that. There are other examples of mountain bike parks or skill parks that are in some cases privately owned, in some cases there's a fee to access them. So there's a wide range of possibilities with no certainty at the ASP stage. So details would come out sort of through a more detailed plan, likely at the development permit stage when someone were to propose that or associated with that a subdivision. So like Ms. Watenko said, we don't know exactly, but there could be a wide range of potential facilities there. There could be some kind of skating facility that may be free. There may be a fee for that. It's unknown at this time.
Do we have an opportunity to ask the proponent these questions at some point?
Yes, so at the public hearing, the proponent can speak to their application as well as answer questions of council.
Okay. I have another question for you as well. On page 62 of my agenda package, which is the conclusion of the presentation by Quantum, it says, I'll just quote you directly what it says, because what you said earlier, I'm not sure reinforces this, but overall the resort center is envisioned as the heart of the Three Sisters Mountain Village, with a focus on health, wellness, lifestyle facilities, and related resort accommodation uses. Now, I thought I heard you say earlier that we're moving away from health and wellness.
So the original 2004 Resort Center ASP, and this is getting into quite of the details of the policy, but in the commercial area, there was the allowance for 150,000 square feet of health and wellness uses, plus an additional 75,000 square feet for accessory uses like retail and entertainment. That has swapped or switched in the proposal. So the proposed amendment is 375 to 450,000 square feet of retail, entertainment, potential health and wellness uses, as well as an additional 75,000 square feet of other accessory commercial uses.
Okay.
Sorry, I'll just provide some added clarification on that point. So the range of the 300 to 450,000 square feet, essentially what has happened is through the policy, they have expanded what can be included in that area. So there is more retail, but there also still remains the possibility of the health and wellness, the spa, those other activities. So they are not defining at this point an allocation of amount of each of those particular types of uses. They're just saying that within this range, these are the types of activities that could take place.
Okay. The wording is a focus on, so that just made it unclear to me. Thank you.
Councillor Comfort.
Yeah, my question is in regards to the health and wellness piece as well. And I note all references to that have been removed from the introduction. They're no longer there. And it just says of the resort center or resort center as opposed to the preface to resort center, which contain health and wellness. So a resort center, I would presume, contains attractions to bring people to visit it. Was it spoken to at all what would be the attraction? Is it just retail or are there other activities like, I don't know?
Sure, and I think I can direct you page 9 of the application rationale. So page 9 of the actual document, not of your application or the agenda package. But they do speak to generating critical mass and what draws people to the resort center. And what leads me to talk about the focus moving away from just health and wellness is this section which talks about similar building retail centers that are large enough to draw that critical mass, and the comparison to places like Whistler.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Any other questions at this time? Councillor Sanford.
I have to find the page that my question refers to, but, $50 to the food bank. Cell phones off, or you pay $50 to the food bank. Thank you very much. In the rationale used to change from health and wellness to, I just have to find the page that this is on. There's a report that's referred to. Sorry, it's a 1996 report by a consultant that claims that retail is a significant aspect of resorts, just like you were saying, Whistler. And I'm just wondering if we're referring to a 1996 report to use that rationale, is that something that is going to be current enough for us to make that decision that this is a good direction to go?
I mean, it's part of the applicant's rationale. Things do change over time. We do know that retail is a popular use. As to this specific report, I haven't pulled it to look at it. I can't comment specifically on that one. But 1996 isn't that old when you're talking about potentially very technical things like bridge design, yeah, maybe there might be new materials, but when you're talking about planning, I don't think 1996 is terribly old, but yes, it could be. I mean, we'd have to pull the report and look at it specifically.
Yeah, it's on page 10 of their introduction, 46 of my agenda.
Yeah.
But it's resort retailing, finding the right mix of the use of land. And the author is Matusik, 1996. And that's what's being used to recommend that entertainment and retail are a significant aspect of shopping and dining have become increasingly popular. So that's not something that we should consider as potentially outdated material.
Again, I haven't read the report, so I
Okay.
can't speak to that one directly. But I think looking at downtown Canmore, we do know that the success of downtown is largely provided by retail and entertainment uses.
I would further suggest that ultimately the information that council feels that they need in order to make an informed decision is a decision of council. So if you feel that more up-to-date information would be required, then that is something that you can request or consider or factor into your decision making. So ultimately it is council's decision whether or not the information is sufficient to allow them to make a decision.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions at this time? Seeing none. Thank you for your presentation. I'm getting signals from some members of council that we should take a short break, as we normally do after 2 hours of meeting. I hate to do that to everybody, but we're going to take a short break, 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Come back and discuss the motions. If everybody who's still here could take their seats, please. I would use a gavel to bring order back to the meeting, but the previous mayor took the gavel with him. It was in kind of bad shape when it left, though, and frankly, I like the bell better. Doesn't that have a nice, good sound to it? So, calling the meeting back to order, and I'm going to reverse or change the order of motions, actually, and I'm going to first move the council give first reading to Bylaw 2017-02, a bylaw to amend the Three Sisters Mountain Village Resort Center Area Structure Plan, Bylaw 23-2004, as amended with clerical amendments shown in attachment 4 to this report. So speaking to the motion, I've been involved in a great many conversations with all parties that are involved since the amendment was first presented. I've read the application. I've thought about the issue most every day for months. Lay awake at night thinking about this. So, given it a lot of thought, and I know the rest of council has as well, and I know that people in our communities are giving a great deal of thought to the proposal. The 2004 area structure plan that was previously approved, that's in effect right now, gave very clear direction, I thought, for the vision that reflected the intent of the NRCB decision report, and which would bring benefit to our community. There's a substantial change of use proposed for the golf course area in the Resort Center ASP, and I'm not of the opinion that such a dramatic change is beneficial to the community at this time. For that reason, I won't be supporting first reading. My job is to represent what I feel is of greatest benefit to the community. I would prefer at this time to see the Resort Center ASP be developed as approved in 2004. I think it could bring some great benefit to our community. And as that area develops out, builds out, it could be that there would be some request further down the line for an expansion. I see this as an expansion. And it may be that after we've had some time to build out the ASP and recognize the benefits, have some better understanding of the impact of the wildlife corridors as a result of the ASP of the resort that's already approved, there could be more meaningful discussions or more understanding of the benefit to the community of expanding the resort center into what's currently the golf course lands. I'm disappointed that the Smith Creek area structure plan has been delayed, although it is reassuring to know that the province is being exhaustive in doing their work. The designation of that final stretch of corridor is critical to the health of the valley and to the wildlife that share the valley with us. So I'm disappointed that the Smith Creek ASP has been delayed. I see a lot of merit in the Smith Creek ASP plan. I think it would be, well, it's been something that we've been set our sights on when this council was first elected, to bring final certainty on the wildlife corridor all the way through to the eastern boundary of the town, to connect with the Wind Valley corridor. That's been our goal. And I believe that once a functional corridor has been designated, and once we are have better understanding of how to manage the human use within the corridor, development for the community outside of the corridor is quite supportable. I've heard people have suggested that there should be no more development in the valley. And I don't support that. I believe that future development of the Three Sisters lands could bring great benefit to the community. So I am disappointed that at this point we don't have an understanding of what will be happening east of the currently developed lands. Regardless, when it comes to considering the Resort Center ASP, Resort Center amendment, I can't see enough merit in the proposal at this time to give it my support at first reading. And so at this time, while I remain open to the debate and the discussion, that's where I'm at right now. Councillor Krausert.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's very clear in the MGA that our role is to decide every matter based on what's in the best interest of the community as a whole. In my review of this application and all of the conversations that I've had, and quite frankly, these sorts of conversations have been going on throughout the time that I've been on council, and they've been going much beyond that. Of course, we were dealing with a very similar issue in 2012. But in reviewing this particular application, there was a lot of concerns that I had. And so the first thing that I do when I approach a piece of legislation that causes me concern is I ask myself, are there ways that it could be changed or amended that could satisfy my concern? However, after giving a lot of thought to the magnitude of the concerns that I have, I felt that, or I couldn't see an amendment that could be done that wouldn't involve a complete rewrite. So I'm left with having to consider giving first reading to an application that I have a lot of concerns about. Those concerns are mostly around environmental. Where there is a true environmental issue, which I believe there is here, I have a very low tolerance for risk. Just as an aside on that, and it's not completely unrelated, I sat on the Smith Creek Advisory Group as the representative from council. I was there to watch, to see how the process went. And one of the things that I saw were very smart, very professional people disagreeing on environmental issues. And what I came to determine was that the thing that most differentiated those individuals was their tolerance for risk. And so I see that there is a differing opinion, and as we see in the reports, a different of approach. But in any event, it leaves sufficient concern in my mind that to allow this application would be outside of the precautionary principle that I believe must be followed. I also believe that the main cause of that is the level of proposed development on the underdeveloped golf course. It's too much. And I have concerns, many concerns on many levels with regards to potential fencing, environmental concerns, economic concerns, social concerns. There's some good things in the application. I particularly like the modernization of the wording to reflect language that jives with our current policies. But in my mind, I think that will have to be for another day. Basically, in absence of an application that I can support, And I simply have no particular appetite for the level of development on the undeveloped golf course as is proposed. I do not think that that's in the best interest of the community. So I will be opposing first reading. If the process does continue beyond first reading, of course, I will listen to what is presented, and I will consider what I hear in coming up with subsequent decisions.
Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Your Worship. There was a lot of information to process, and I think that was stated early in the council agenda this evening. One of the real considerations that are important to me about this application is the fiscal analysis. And one of the words that was used often and throughout this whole document was subject to prevailing market conditions. And to me, that makes the fiscal analysis very tentative. And the way this project is wrapped together with the development of the housing on the golf course implies to me that there's a big dependence on the prevailing market conditions to drive the commercial aspect of this operation. And I think I was looking for a resort. I was looking for a resort center. And what I feel that we're being proposed here is another town center. It's a town with a bunch of services to facilitate the people living there. And the prevailing market conditions will be determined by how many people actually live there and how many people inhabit that space. And I thought we were getting something different. I was looking for an anchor hotel. I was looking for something that's going to draw visitors and keep visitors here for a certain period of time and use a footprint of land to develop something that was going to be a resort and that was going to be more of a commercial and resort nature. I don't really see that in here. And when I saw the reference to a 1996 report to imply that retail was the way to go, I think a lot has changed in retail in the last 20 years. Online shopping being one of the major considerations. So to move to that direction and imply that that's going to be the solution to the commercial aspect of this development, I'm not convinced by that. So I won't be supporting this application today.
Councillor Comfort.
I also find I can't support this application, this bylaw first reading. I am concerned that we moved from a very clear direction to consider the two ASPs together, and that's not happening. I'm concerned about all the question marks. There's a question mark about undermining, a very serious one, as Mr. Stevenson has pointed out to us and others, and it's an issue I think that needs to have some kind of resolution, at least to be in clear negotiations with the province with a view to being able to resolve that. Councillor Krauset spoke very eloquently to the law and to how he feels about it, as well as Councillor Sanford. For me personally, I'm really pleased that the third-party independent review did exactly what it's intended to do and brought a higher level of scrutiny to what was being proposed. Because I'm not a wildlife expert. So when two wildlife experts or two environmental experts face off, the reports need to be really clear for me to see where the flaws are or what's being called out. And in this case, I found that they were pretty clear. And just at the base of it, it's too much of a change from golf course to housing and resort accommodation. If I went to planning and said, okay, I want to build a little stoop off the front of my house, and it's going to be just a little stoop. And then I came back and said, I'm making a little change, I just thought I'd let you know, and I'm going to have marble lines and a water feature and gold railings, and it's just too much of a change, you know? So it's not just an amendment. It feels like a whole new ASP is needed. So anyway, that's how I'm feeling, that I can't support it.
Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Your Worship. I've listened to this too many times over the years. We've heard we've got a new and improved, we've got a better plan. I think Councillor Comfort perhaps said it well with maybe we need a new ASP. We've done a wholesale change here, and before we got, for me personally, before we got 5 minutes in the presentation, I had alarm bells going off about the quality of the wildlife arguments. You know, the two consultants are duking it out. I mean, thanks to everybody at this table for putting the third-party review process in place. It just nailed its first problem. So I mean, when we start there, then as I listen to the rest of it, you know, some of the stuff that my colleagues have brought forward is just solid gold, but it just completely makes this, it's just not, I can't support this at this time. You know, understanding and appreciating the fact that the gentleman here, that the property managers, they have a right to develop something, but this product isn't acceptable to me.
Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. So we've had several weeks to digest both this and more than several weeks, the Smith Creek ASP, and it's been an interesting sort of learning and reading process because it is new and it's fresh and it's not being presented in an iterative way like what was presented to here today, where we got to see maps and so on. It's a slog to read through, as I'm sure those of you who have read it have noticed. But I know that there's questions that we were hoping would come out of seeing and answers of seeing those two documents side by each. And we're not given that opportunity with the delay of the province. So zeroing in then on the ASP amendment, it was an interesting refresher because it reminded me of when I first decided to get into this seat. I remember when sitting in a room, maybe it was this one, with all the boards laid out, and it was when the ASP first officially was coming forward to council, and going, oh my gosh, that's what's going on out there, and realizing, like many of you, that that was my opportunity to get involved, to get engaged. And I've learned an incredible amount since then. But what I have learned in particular is that that although there are questions that I would like to see answered with regards to the reference out of first reading that I think are really important, and I think that there's a lot of people in this room that actually would like the opportunity to stand up and speak at a public hearing and tell their fellow citizens what it is they feel is right or not right with this application. I think I would prefer to see that energy focused at the Smith Creek ASP. I think that this ASP, much like the mayor has stated, is fine the way it is. And I think that we need to address the vision that was seen from a development perspective in the ASP that we have. And if we want to expand, or if the owner wants to expand into those other areas, then we can think about it at that time. But at this time, I'm fine with the status quo. I won't say that I'm anti-change. I just think I would like to see that original vision zeroed in on. And so I will not be supporting first reading.
Councillor Seeley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I'm siding with the rest of my colleagues on this one. This is a substantial change of use, and I did meet with Hub and Landing residents, and I'm concerned about Area F and just development. I mean, we talk about recreation amenities, and I can go there. I think that makes sense. And then when we start talking about residential resort accommodation on undermined lands, it brings up a lot of things. I think we need certainty, and we don't have that. So I won't be able to support this, or I'll be able to. Yeah.
Further discussion on the motion to give first reading to the amendment. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Beg pardon?
Mulligan, can we do a mulligan?
Too late. So the motion to give first reading to the Resort Center ASP amendment. First reading, those in favor? Opposed? Motion's defeated unanimously. Given that decision, I see no point in giving the other two motions that were prepared around change to the MDP and setting a public hearing date. Councillor McCallum?
Thank you. Could I speak a moment about the public hearing date and times that were originally proposed? So, can I?
Okay.
There was some information out in the community that we were trying to cut off the public hearing times by only having them from 1:30 to 4:30, and I would like to clarify that we were actually trying to expand public participation in the public hearing process by having it at that time as well as at 6 o'clock, because we need to recognize as a community that we're a 24/7 town and that we need to open up more opportunities for people of the public to be able to participate, and it's not just after dinner time as
Okay.
for some families.
So we do have a few more items on the agenda for this evening. Anybody that'd like to leave at this point, I'll take a short breath.
Yeah, I was.
Okay, we're back in session. Moving on to item G2, Snow and Ice Control Agreement Extension. Mr. Canmore.
Yes, good evening, Mayor Borman and members of council. So the two items for you tonight, I'm just going to go through the first one. Here's the recommendation for council's consideration. It's essentially to approve the contract with Volker Steffen for an additional 2 years so that it will expire on July 31st, 2019. So just in Cole's notes, the current agreement we have in place with Volker Steffen began in 2005. The service levels that they provide for us are largely defined by the snow removal policy, which was approved by council. It has been extended a number of times, largely because the Volker Steffen themselves are kind of in a difficult situation right now with the province. They've been sort of strung along by the province saying that they will go out to larger tender and extend for 10 or greater period of time. And each time the province has come back and said, no, we're just going to give you a 1-year extension, a 2-year extension. And so by virtue of our relationship with them and providing similar services, we have kind of been forced to go along with it because it doesn't make much sense to change course in providing the service for 1 or 2 year period. So we are hopeful that this is the last extension that they are going to get with the province, and the province will have the opportunity to sit down with service providers provincially and look at a longer period of time, and then that provides the town of Canmore an opportunity to decide, do we want to go that way? Do we want to go out to tender, continue with Volker Steffen is of course still an option, or provide the services in-house. So until there's a longer period of time to look at, it's prudent to just continue with these 1 and 2 year extensions. So as I said, this extension will go to end of 2 years, July 31st, and really the rest of the conditions remain unchanged, except for something I'd like to highlight. In 2016, when we did the last extension that will expire this year, is we were able to sit down with Volker Steffen and negotiate a $42,000 reduction in some of the fees. So that will continue into the end of the term. So with that, I just have mostly, if there are any questions, and I wanted to have some graphics in my presentation, is a table with what we've historically paid since the contract has begun, and you can see what the contract increases have been. They are, as per the agreement we have with them, stipulated by the province of Alberta. So the extension, or the increase that they tell us, is what is granted to all the other providers in town. And you can see it has fluctuated considerably over the years, except for a couple years where we were able to negotiate something less than that. We don't know what the 2017 rate is. We should be knowing very shortly. So if there are no questions to that, I will just bring up the...
Councillor Comfort.
So I'm missing something here. I'm probably tired, but so in 2014 it was 431,000, et cetera. 15, 161, 226, and then you're showing an increase of 2.59%. Shouldn't that be a decrease?
Sorry, I should have made that clear. The column that shows the actual expense, or maybe I'll start with the right-hand side. The increase applies to the standby fee and the fee that begins once a snow event occurs and we trigger the trucks to go out and move snow and put down salted sand. The actual cost does fluctuate considerably based on the number of snow events we have. So the rates have increased by those, but the actual cost to provide the service can be very different.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then the recommendation for council's consideration, unless there are any further questions.
Nice graph.
Oh, thank you. I worked on it.
Yeah. Okay, I think council's looked at the same report and considered the same motion several times since I've been elected. So I understand the request. I'm happy to support it, but I don't have any questions. Are there any questions at all? Thank you very much for your report. I'll move that council approve a 2-year extension of the snow and ice control agreement with Volker Steven Contracting Limited until July 31st, 2019. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And Mr. Canmore, you're up with the Elk Run Maintenance Boulevard lease extension, item G3.
Yes, so this one is follows a very similar vein to the previous motion approved by council. So the space that Volker Steffen currently utilizes for their work, both for operations within the town of Canmore as well as the provincial highways in the Bow Valley, is based out of the Elk Run Boulevard site, 103 Elk Run Boulevard. So, and I should also mention, just in case either members of council or the public is not aware, that the town of Canmore owns this site. So they have a lease with us. And you can see that it's quite a large lease. It's one of the larger spaces of land in the Bow Valley. There are 5 buildings on there. The one I wanted to highlight, A, B, C, and D were existing when they took over the site. However, Building E, which you can see very well from Highway 1A, a large building that Volker Steffen did construct as part of one of the conditions within the lease to contain any runoff from the sand that they apply a salt mixture to. And then there's also a couple of above ground fuel tanks that are located right here where the cursor is. So that's the space we're talking about. The current lease was signed late in 2007. It was essentially a 10-year to expire on July 31st, 2018. So similar points raised in the previous presentation. They have received a 1-year extension with the province to provide services on the provincial highways, and so they're looking to continue to have a home to provide those services for the provincial contract, as well as now the town of Canmore's at the same time. So they built the facility, and we're asking that it continue to 2019 to follow suit with the provincial contract that they have, the contract extension they have with us, and now hopefully the lease extension all follow and expire at the same time. To help explain the fees that we have right now, so in 2007 when we negotiated the fee, the lands were assessed at $184,000, which represented about 90% of the lands. The town of Canmore, through its own operations, has access to up to 10%, which we utilize in that top northwest corner. They did receive a credit because they do provide the town of Canmore with snow and ice control. And then they received a second credit because they constructed and financed and built the materials storage building. And then you can see that the subtotal is $155,000, which has been increasing annually by CPI each year. So it's currently sitting for 2016 at $175,000. And then the only change we would have for the agreement is that credit number 2 would be removed. So it would be the $175,000 and change in addition to the 58, which would be the going rate until the end of the term, basically 1 year. And if there are no questions on that, that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you. Are there any questions from council on this report? Councillor Comfort?
So were Volker Steffen to no longer provide the services to the province and therefore no longer need that facility that they built, would we then own it, or would we have to pay money to Volker Steffen to take ownership of that building that they built?
We, at the end of the term, because we have, it's gone the full term, we will have full ownership of that facility. And that's why that credit is removed.
Okay, thank you.
Are there other questions from members of council at this time? Seeing none, thanks for your report. I'll move the council approve a 1-year lease extension for the Elk Run Maintenance Facility located at 103 Elk Run Boulevard with Volker Steven Contracting Limited until July 31st, 2019. Is there a discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously.
Thank you.
Now, you're welcome. Now move the council go in camera. Those in favor? Opposed? We're in camera.